Welcome to today's Explainer. We hear the theory behind climate change mitigation all the time, right? But today, we're actually looking under the hood at the operational playbook of a truly massive global enterprise. We're unpacking the Capgemini Environmental Report. Our goal? To figure out exactly how a company with a staggering 340,000 team members spread across 50 countries takes these big, ambitious sustainability goals and actually makes them happen on a global scale.
Let's just dive right in with a pretty stark reality check. Cyril Garcia, who's Capgemini's head of global sustainability services, really hits the nail on the head in the executive summary. He points out that 2023 was literally the hottest year on record since 1850. I mean, we've all seen the news, right? The wildfires, the extreme flooding, record low sea ice. The macro climate problem is here. It's undeniable. And as Garcia puts it, inaction is simply not an option anymore. This absolute urgency is exactly what's driving a massive, sweeping shift in corporate strategy right now.
Which brings us to a massive structural challenge. Get this. For a lot of companies out there, an overwhelming 90% or even more of their disclosed emissions are what we call Scope 3. These are the notoriously hard-to-reach indirect emissions. Think about it for a second. Sure, you can swap out your own office light bulbs, but how on earth do you control the emissions of your entire supply chain, or the electricity your employees are using when they log in from their living rooms? This 90% figure perfectly frames the sheer scale of the puzzle we're about to explore today.
So here's the roadmap for today's Explainer. First, the climate imperative. Then, we'll look at the net zero strategy, followed by progress and internal operations. After that, tackling Scope 3 emissions, moving on to beyond carbon reductions, and finally, partnering for global impact. Let's get to it.
Starting off with Section 1, the climate imperative. We're witnessing this fascinating convergence right now between environmental reality and harsh business reality. It's wild. The number of executives who truly get the business case for sustainability has actually tripled since 2022. The climate consequences, these unprecedented damages we're seeing out in the real world, they're just becoming impossible to brush off. Businesses are finally waking up to the fact that climate risk is, well, it's business risk. It's no longer just some nice-to-have talking point for a PR brochure. It is a fundamental, bottom-line economic imperative.
Moving right along to Section 2, the net zero strategy.
You know the old saying, a goal without a timeline is just a wish. Capgemini has this big headline commitment to reach net zero by 2040, but the really vital part is the structured roadmap they've built to actually get there. Working off a 2019 baseline, they've set some heavy-hitting near-term targets for 2030, like slashing Scope 1 and 2 emissions by 80%, and that builds up to a massive 90% absolute reduction by 2040. And here's the kicker. These aren't just arbitrary numbers they pulled out of thin air. They're totally validated by the Science Based Targets Initiative, which makes sure they actually align with what climate science tells us is absolutely necessary to prevent disaster.
All right, Section 3, progress in internal operations. Let's see how they're doing.
This is where the numbers start to get genuinely impressive. As of 2023, a staggering 96% of Capgemini's electricity now comes from renewable sources. 96%. To put that into perspective, they were sitting at just 28% back in 2019. Pulling off that kind of massive transition across a sprawling global footprint, yeah, that is no small feat for a company of this size.
And because of that monumental shift to renewables, plus a very solid 40% drop in overall office energy consumption, we arrive at this absolute mic drop of a number, a 91% reduction in their Scope 1 and 2 emissions compared to 2019. I mean, they haven't just met their 2030 near-term targets for these operational scopes, they have absolutely blown past them. They've essentially already hit the 2040 long-term targets for Scope 1 and 2. How crazy is that?
And to be clear, this isn't just about buying some fancy green energy credits on paper. We're talking real, physical infrastructure here. In 2023 alone, Capgemini generated over 14,500 megawatt-hours from massive on-site solar panel installations. That's enough juice to power a whole neighborhood. It really grounds those abstract percentages we were just talking about into concrete, undeniable reality.
Okay, on to Section 4, tackling Scope 3 emissions, the tricky stuff. So, Scope 3. These indirect emissions across the value chain are notoriously difficult to rein in. Every single thing a company buys, how the employees travel, how they commute, it all adds up, and it usually makes up the vast majority of a company's footprint. Frankly, this was Capgemini's toughest hurdle in 2023. You have to remember, it was the first full post-pandemic year. People were finally returning to offices, flying back out to client sites, and business travel basically surged right back up.
So how do you even begin to attack a problem that is largely out of your direct control? Well, Capgemini is going with a multi-pronged strategy. First up, the supply chain. Since 44% of their emissions actually come from purchased goods, they've introduced these mandatory ESG pledges. Essentially, they're requiring their suppliers to set their own carbon reduction targets. Second, mobility. They're pushing to transition their entire company car fleet to 100% electric vehicles by 2030, and they already hit 34% in 2023. Third, they're deeply embedding hybrid work models to cut down on commuting. And finally, my favorite part, the IT side. They actually rolled out energy management software across 322,000 employee laptops. They are actively monitoring and reducing their IT energy footprint. That is literally scaling a climate intervention right down to the micro level.
Next up, Section 5, Beyond Carbon Reductions.
A true green transition has to be holistic, right? It's not just about CO2. It's about how an office actually functions within its local ecosystem. We are talking about rainwater harvesting systems at their Indian campuses with capacities larger than Olympic swimming pools. We're looking at advanced sewage treatments that recycle gray water so nothing goes to waste. And it's about massive cultural shifts too. Take their global Zero Hero campaign, for example. It's aimed at completely phasing out single-use plastics and getting employees to truly buy into a circular economy.
And the results of looking beyond just carbon are incredibly tangible. Compared to their 2019 baseline, Capgemini saw a 44% drop in total water withdrawal, plus a massive 69% reduction in the waste generated per employee. That's huge. Furthermore, they're actively mapping out biodiversity risks across their sites. And, I love this, they are using their core asset, their technological expertise, through the Tech for Positive Futures Challenge. It actually empowers their employees to build real-world tech solutions for climate adaptation and nature preservation.
Moving to our final piece, Section 6, Partnering for Global Impact.
Now, this is where the magic really happens. Look, a single company can only do so much internally. If you want to create a true global ripple effect, you need partners. Capgemini India recently signed a memorandum of understanding with TERI. That's the Energy and Resources Institute. And guys, it is a powerhouse pairing. You take Capgemini's deep expertise in sustainable IT, data, AI, and corporate strategy, and you merge that with TERI's absolute world-class research in clean energy, carbon sequestration, and water management.
Which brings us to a buzzword you are definitely going to be hearing more and more, the dual transition. This partnership with TERI, it isn't just about sitting around writing reports. It's about creating sustainability as a service. It's about combining hardcore engineering capabilities with digital transformation to help their clients build entirely new, sustainable business models from the ground up. Because the reality is, you cannot have a modern digital transition without a sustainable transition. They are absolutely two sides of the same exact coin.
And that outward push leads us straight to this mind-blowing number, 10 million tons. Because of all these capabilities, these frameworks, and these partnerships we've discussed, Capgemini has set a monumental goal. They want to help their clients reduce their own carbon emissions by 10 million tons of CO2 equivalent by 2030. That right there is the pure power of exporting your internal sustainability playbook. By helping other massive organizations decarbonize, the positive impact doesn't just add up, it scales exponentially.
Which brings us to the end of our explainer today, but before we go, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought. We've just seen how a massive global enterprise restructures its energy, tackles its complex supply chain, and partners up for huge outward impact. So I want you to look at your own workflows, look at your own teams, your own companies. How can your organization shift from just, doing business to adopting a true business-to-planet mindset? The blueprint is out there, the technology is absolutely there. And as we established at the very beginning, inaction is just not an option. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll see you next time.